Hey everyone, this is Rampart, and I'm here today with Legend of Total War. I am trying to do a interview to kind of poke his brain about my currently new project that I'm trying to do with my indie game studio to try and make a spiritual successor to Medieval 2. So I just thought, as a major person in the Total War space, I thought Legend would be a great person to first try and talk through this idea with, to kind of see what things he would like to see in a spiritual successor, and also what things he would like to not see in them, as I think it is really important for this project to try and get a base idea from the community of what this actually looks like, because essentially this is supposed to be kind of trying to take the place of Medieval 3, so how the hell do we live up to expectations and have a good game? So, we'll lead things over to you then, Legend.
Sure. Do you have any specific questions in mind, or do you want me to just start rambling?
Well, if we want to, we can specifically start off, because I was thinking we can maybe almost break this down based off of specific aspects of Total War. So I know, like, older concepts that have been kind of gone for a while in for Total War, like cities. Cities, for example, that's like a huge thing that's changed since Medieval 2. There's been a whole lot of different changes to generals. Kind of anything that really resonates with you that you'd want to talk about, that would be a strong thing for you that you'd like to see or not see. I know for me, I play a lot of Medieval 2, so I have a lot of opinions on what I think would be good to bring back. But I know you enjoy Medieval 2, you don't do a lot of recordings for it as much anymore. But I know it's still a game that you enjoy.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So do we want to maybe talk about, I don't know, any thoughts on generals or any other strong preferences you have on...
Okay. So I think with generals, you have to make it so that the player cares about the characters, and that's something that's sort of being lost in the newer Total War games. What they're doing at the moment is making your entire faction, rather than being the spirit of the country, you're just like this one character. And all your other generals are just generic, and you just don't care about them. And I think part of the problem is that they lack a dynasty. So part of what made Rome 1 and Medieval 2 like the appeal of the characters is that you had a limited amount of time with those characters. No matter how good or bad those characters are, they will eventually succumb to mortality, which is something that just doesn't happen necessarily in the newer Total War games. And so people don't really get attached to them, because there is something sublime about having a character that no matter what you do, this character will eventually die. And you know, they might have children, and then those children will either live up to their parents' abilities or not. And so you get to experience this dynasty throughout a couple of hundred years, depending on how long you play. And rather than just leveling up these characters, this person gained 500 experience, level up time, and then you just design them however. In Rome 1 and Medieval 2, and all the way really up until Rome 2, these traits that would give them improved command skill. If they were chivalrous in battle or chivalrous on the campaign map, then that would be reflected in their traits, and that would continue to improve them. You couldn't just have a general that would murder everyone and then you just go, I'm going to put 5 points into chivalry. That just couldn't fly. And so these characters were reflections of how they behaved.
Yeah, because I know that's
not what happens in newer Total War games.
Yeah, we've lost a lot of the sandbox elements of the newer Total Wars. I know I have a lot of campaigns where I have had so many small little instances pop up because of the characters that, in the fact that these are mortal people. I, at one point, playing the Tsardom's Total War mod for Medieval 2, I seduced a Naples General Ladislao, and he became my king at one point. He became my Emperor of Rome at one point. I had a campaign in Stainless Steel Historical Improvement Project where I had this it was the Welf family line, who slowly over time just became the bastions of defending my kingdom. They defended their city so goddamn often that they just became known as the defenders of my kingdom. You really do miss out a lot on those like little sandbox kind of little stories you can tell with your characters, because everybody's immortal now. Like I just did a recording with Grimgore, and the fact that like, oh, I have had to kick Balthazar Gelt's ass 8 times. It's not special to fight him anymore.
it's a little bit different with Warhammer because these are characters with predetermined lore, and it's just different with Warhammer. But when you use something in a historical context, like if you play Troy, for example,
Hmm.
and you go up against Achilles and you beat Achilles, and then he just comes back, and then you beat Achilles again, and he just comes back, or he's a single entity and he's taking on hundreds of units. It what's it called, suspends disbelief sort of thing.
Hmm.
It's just not quite the same. I mean, you can kind of appreciate it for the fantasy Total War games, but
Hmm.
when it comes to a historical setting, having a faction leader that cannot be killed, um, I think there's less appeal in that sort of situation. It also appeals more to casuals, I
Hmm.
suppose, and also shorter campaigns. Just campaigns that don't go into the hundreds of turns, but go into the tens of turns.
Yeah, and I can see that. And I know for myself, I just find it weird to think about because I've played the beginning of the end times mod a lot for Medieval 2, which has those same characters in Warhammer Fantasy, but they're mortal. And it definitely does work a lot more with fantasy titles, I would agree, but I still think you do still lose a little bit of the attachment to your characters because they're immortal. But
Yeah,
it
for
does
sure.
work a lot better in fantasy, for sure. So that's a lot about on generals. I know one thing for sure that I want to do is I do like the idea of bringing back mortality for characters. That's definitely something I really do want because I think that's very important for Total War. Because for me, Total War's always been about the sandbox. That's the most important aspect for me. Like the the reason why I know like I've really appreciated the Imperium Surrecta mod for Rome Remastered is that map is so huge and so ambitious that the idea of doing a just conquer the world is really really unrealistic unless you want to drive yourself insane. And you can just have smaller, little story-driven campaigns that you're doing yourself. Like, oh, I have this goal I'm doing for myself. I have a campaign right now where I'm playing as Khazad-dûm in the Divide and Conquer mod from Medieval 2. And that one, instead of just take cities you need, take the amount you need, oh, hey, I'm going to go help fight against the forces of evil. I don't need to do this, but I'm doing it because this is the little story I'm setting up for myself. I know one thing I've thought of for this spiritual successor is a way, an additional way besides just making everybody mortal again, to kind of add more attachment to characters. Besides the fact that I know I miss the man of the hour system so much, having a random guy that you can have in your army join on up and join your higher ranks really is kind of cool to me. At least I like the idea of like, oh, I raise this person up, they've joined my kingdom, maybe he eventually becomes my king at some point. It's kind of cool. I've thought of a way that going back to having it so the armies are always the generals, or at least their bodyguard. I personally like the idea, and I have to test this out and see how well this would work. But one way to make you care about your units more is I wonder if I could get a system set up in place where you could have a normal swordsman that you rank up once it gets to max chevrons. Hey, you could raise that guy up as a noble. It's still going to be the same bodyguard that it was before, but you now have essentially another named character that you can start trying to attach yourself onto. Maybe have him join your family that is now in your army. He's just a renowned captain in your army.
Yeah, something like that could be quite interesting.
Because I think that would be a way to give you more access to these characters that you care about, um, and try and have it so you can have more ways to. I just really do miss the way of, oh, I had this one character, I've grown attached to this character, and eventually they might die, but I can also have other things that I can do with them to advance their little stories for them. Because I really do think far too, and this is somebody this is for me. I play D&D. I play a lot of RPGs. I hate how much games have been over turned into RPGs. They just keep adding random RPG stats, well, unnecessarily.
Well, I think that one of the reasons they do that is because it's easy.
It is. It really is.
It's easy to implement, and people interact with it quite easily. It's quite casual, and I think that's why it's just ease of use. It's a tried and true method, um, and that's why they go for it.
Yeah, I would agree to that. So switching maybe now to cities and kind of building up cities. So I know since Medieval 2, we've switched to a far more simplified and you could say refined system for building. I know for myself, I've always kind of disliked the build system, especially in what it is right now in Warhammer. It's very cut and dry how you build your stuff up, and I know for me at least, I really do wish I could find a way that we can like go back to the build system in Medieval 2, where
Yeah, the build system in Medieval 2 is definitely superior, but I think one of the reasons why they've done it this way, I'm not trying to like make excuses for them, I'm just giving a thought for it, is that these maps have way more settlements than what you had in Medieval 2.
yeah,
And if you find yourself with 200 settlements that you're individually micromanaging, a lot of players just get fatigued with that kind of stuff, and so they've streamlined it to the point where you can really sort of finish a province very quickly, and then you just never have to look at it again, because the core experience of the game is the battles, essentially, and so they don't want you to spend loads of time micromanaging your cities.
I've had a lot of people, whenever I do recordings, actually kind of be a little saddened when I don't show the buildings as much, because I know some people actually really do appreciate that. I can very easily see the aspect of fatigue. I saw that myself when I was doing my playthrough of the Imperium Surrector mod for Rome Remastered. That map is so ambitious and so large. It really does showcase that problem to an extreme. I had 300 settlements at the end of an Antigonian Kingdom campaign. I had 300 settlements.
How many settlements are in the game? Because I remember the original Rome in Medieval 2 could only sustain 199 settlements.
The most recent version that they're going to be releasing in, I think, about a month, version 0.6, is supposed to have 1,700 settlements.
Yeah, that's... Oh, jeez. Okay.
It's insane. And I know...
That is 3 times the size, more than 3 times the size of the Immortal Empires map of Warhammer.
Yeah, it is... Oh boy, there was a reason why I got very exhausted with that campaign after a while. As I like building up cities like that. I like being able to actually have a say of like, oh, this area I want to be more military focused, so I'm going to build that up first. Okay, this area needs to be more trade focused. I want to build that up first in that way. And I can definitely see the aspect of it's very fatiguing. One aspect that I'm playing around with right now as a way, because I know going back to buildings, the way that before we went to the far too oversimplified way, I didn't mind how Three Kingdoms did it. I always have liked how Shogun's done it. I liked Empire having different things on the map to interact with, but it did get annoying having factions and just armies just continuously raiding tiny little provinces. Like, that's irritating as hell. But one thing that I've thought about is maybe a system that could work for the spiritual successor is essentially you still have your main capital city. This would be the area that is walled. This is where you do all the development in. This is where you have everything tied to. But try and have it so you showcase more stuff on the map. Try and have it so it's not as... This would be where it'd be hard to get it right. So it's not as annoying as it was in Empire, but have it so you have smaller settlements, essentially akin to the small settlement battles in Warhammer that we have right now, unwalled, where it's like, hey, this is supposed to represent your farming village that you have nearby. It's pretty small. It's going to focus and localize where you technically have all your farms be built, or a good chunk of them. Same thing you'd say for like maybe you have a resource for Cav, or you have your port towns and stuff like that. And this kind of leads into an idea that I'm playing around with that I really think would be a way to actually revolutionize the Medieval 2 and not just have it just be a HD remaster that's a fan made. Is similar to a mod I tried, the Gothic mod for Medieval 2. It kind of tried to do a similar thing where there's these small little cities around your main region. And one thing that I think makes sense is, okay, you're building your city as you would normally in Medieval 2. Yes, you have it so that it's also represented on the map a little bit more with these small little villages. And have it so that instead of just taking those like a normal settlement you have right now in Warhammer, like it's just a minor settlement, it's part of this big province, it's like an occupation. Kind of akin to more like we have in like Paradox. And so when that's occupied, you do not get access to whatever those buildings are there. The person that's occupying it can't take it until they actually take the region. But it's like a way, oh, well, shit, I don't have access to my horses anymore. I can't recruit my cavalry in this area because they took my area that I'm producing all my horses.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me a little bit of Shogun 2, where they had it was a bit simplified, but let's just say you had a province that had horses on it, and you can develop up that building, and it wouldn't be in the main settlement, and you could send your army in to basically capture it. You wouldn't claim it until you get the settlement, but you could prevent them from making use of it. So that was one way to sort of draw the army out to come and fight you by raiding the province, which most of the time it wouldn't work, but. Yeah, that's similar to what has been done in the past, and it's definitely not being done currently.
Because the reason why I think that'd be interesting to kind of go back to something similar to that is I've been playing around with the idea for the spiritual successor, taking inspiration actually from Demon Daniel from Warhammer 3, actually. The idea of being able to have like a custom start as a mercenary lord, and kind of basically being able to like take over a kingdom yourself as a mercenary, I think that could kind of be interesting. But one way I think to try and have it so that the gameplay around it is more interesting and not as simplified is I kind of hate in some regard that in Total War, it makes sense because it's called Total War, it's always you are either at peace or just war. It's just those two options. And you don't get to see border disputes as often. And I kind of like the idea of, with these smaller settlements that you have attached to the city, especially if you're leading this like custom mercenary general that's trying to take over a kingdom, you could raid those areas that are not attached to the main city. Like, okay, it's kind of more similar to Bannerlord, actually, where you're raiding these smaller cities. That's a way you can sustain and make money, and you're pissing off the person that owns it, yes, but you're not actively in a full-scale war with them. To kind of actually have it so you can kind of reflect and showcase, hey, there might be there might be these two massive factions.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of Crusader Kings. So that was, you would have a casus belli, so the various different types of wars. So you could have a war where your actual goal is not to obtain any land whatsoever, it's just to humiliate your opponent. I think EU4 does it as well. But yeah, that would be different for a Total War aspect, because it's either war or peace, that's all there is, like you said.
Yeah, and that's one thing that, like, that's kind of why I've been kind of latching onto this possible custom general idea, because one of the first things that I'm thinking of that I would possibly try and implement for this campaign is you could essentially almost view the Norman invasion of England as you are William the Conqueror, and this is your custom mercenary army that is trying to take over England. But initially it's starting off as, hey, maybe you're going to be trying to raid other areas to get money. Because I do think, like, it makes sense that we have it so it is. Total War is supposed to be all about just the wars, but there is a bit of a nuance between endlessly fighting things and just getting bored of that, and having smaller little things and more interesting things happen out of... Because, like, this is how I view it, in the fact that I really appreciate what we have right now with Warhammer 3, where I can interact with my allies more. But even still, they're kind of idiots. And, like, I know in Total War campaigns, Medieval 2 campaigns, sorry, I occasionally have the mentality of, okay, like with my Khazad-dûm campaign right now, I'm not trying to just conquer the world. I'm trying to eradicate evil, yes, but I'm like, oh, I'm taking this region, giving over to an ally so they can do something. To try and kind of get that middle ground of peace and war, because we just don't have a proper way to implement that right now in Total War games.
Yeah, they also don't really want to overcomplicate it. I mean, the most complex diplomacy you're probably going to see in a Total War game ever is Three Kingdoms.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where I think with this... That's why I kind of view it as opposed to going full on into the different claim system like Paradox has. I think the way you could kind of have this and not have it be too overcomplicated in Total War is essentially just like you are taking an action towards this region, and that can be hostile, but it is not officially a war just yet, and I think that would kind of work. I have to kind of play around with that idea more to see if it would work the way I want it to.
Oh yeah, I mean, you got to play around with these sort of things and just see how it works. And sometimes an idea seems really good in your head, and then you put it into practice, and it's like, ugh, just doesn't work.
And that's where, like, I know for myself, I'm thinking of Pharaoh with the weather system that they've showcased.
Yeah,
Where,
that is so lame. Because for one thing, we've already had dynamic weather before, but when you have a modifier that comes in that doesn't last very long and only happens once per battle, and it applies the same penalties to both sides, what's the point of even having it in the first place?
and I know for myself, I absolutely started to end up hating it with the sandstorms. The sandstorms with the constant damage and the fact that it just applies to both armies. It's like in practice, I can understand. Like it's a thematic thing to try and get this idea across, but when it's implemented, it's not fun and it doesn't really change the battle in a meaningful way. Like I know for myself, I actually don't mind the idea of a dynamic weather system where it like making it so that you can't see and it's harder to see because of a sandstorm or maybe a snowstorm, and so like your vision and vision is reduced. Like that makes sense, but I think we've done it better in the past. In I think Rome 2 actually had a pretty decent dynamic weather system, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I played Rome 2 though.
I don't remember it in Rome 2. I'm just trying to think. I'm fairly sure that you could decide, you get like three rolls to decide what weather you would start off with, and it would pretty much determine it for the entire battle. I don't think it would change. I think the last time we had actual dynamic weather was possibly Medieval 2. At least it was possible to have dynamic weather, but the base game didn't really do it that much. But mods would make it dynamic. But I think in Shogun 1 and definitely in Medieval 1, the weather would actually change across the day. But that was Medieval 1 was actually 20 years ago, so it seems like Creative Assembly forgot that they've done it in the past.
Yeah, yeah. So let's see. So we've covered generals, we've covered cities. Here's a random question, just kind of a more simplified thing. So, what Total War game do you think has had the best balance of units for how they feel? Because I know that's a very important aspect. Because don't want a game like this to feel too arcadey. Because I know for me, at times, Warhammer definitely feels very arcadey. I think Warhammer 3 doesn't feel as arcadey as 2 did. But then you also don't want to have it so it's too gritty and takes too long.
The best balance across units, I would have to say, would be Total War Attila.
Okay, Total War Attila. Okay. I can definitely see that. I know for me, I almost always instinctually go towards Shogun 2. That's again because
that's true. Shogun 2 as well. Thing is, I think I played more Attila than Shogun 2, and I certainly played more Attila multiplayer than Shogun 2, and it felt to me like Attila multiplayer, like the balancing was really good, and I just didn't play that much Shogun 2, to be honest. So sometimes I just forget about it.
Yeah, I know. It's really fresh on my mind right now because I'm playing the Last Alliance mod for Shogun 2, and that's just really showcasing to me like how good it feels. I would say like Cav kind of feel a little weak in Shogun 2, but I've always really liked how Bowmen feel in Shogun 2. I think infantry feel pretty good in Shogun 2 as well. It's definitely an issue of trying to make sure
all the units definitely feel pretty good, and I think one of the reasons why it does feel good in those games, specifically Total War Attila and Shogun 2, is because morale shocks actually matter in those games, and they're very impactful. So even if a charge doesn't necessarily kill half a unit, like it does in sort of Medieval 2, at least you've got a good chance of routing it, especially if you rear charge it, and it can be very satisfying to see an entire army that's still in pretty good shape basically be rolled up and routed, which doesn't happen in the newer Total War games. You have to destroy them utterly in order to get them to rout.
You might see it in Skaven. Skaven's like the only time I'd ever see that.
So super low tier units, then you can actually get a chain route going, but outside of that, it's not common to get a massive chain route going in the newer Total War games.
And this kind of leads to something that I've always been thinking about, where I miss, and I know this is something I've focused on so much in Medieval 2, is the Magic 85, as I always like to call it. The fact that in the past, if you were skilled enough and you could route the army quickly enough and capture enough of the army on the campaign map, it would actually fully die and it would not escape. I know for myself, I genuinely kind of miss aspects of that because ever since, what was it? I think ever since Empire, there's no point to run down extra armies, units as they're running off the map. It doesn't do anything. You're not going to guarantee the army dies. And
Yeah, so it's different systems. So from Warscape Engine onwards, it's a different system from Rome 1 and Medieval 1, Medieval 2. So in Rome 1 and Medieval 2, in order to guarantee that you wiped out the enemy armies, you had to kill the commander if it was a named character. If it was a captain, it didn't matter. And then you had to kill at minimum 85% or capture 85% of the enemy army. If you managed to do that, the remaining up to 15% would be obliterated, just be wiped off the map. But in situations where you, let's say, just couldn't possibly catch them because they're full of horse archers or whatever, and you only managed to kill, say, 50% of the enemy army, and they got away, and then you would attack it again on the next turn, on the same turn, because they couldn't run away, and you beat them again, and you once again beat them down 50%, they could run away again and again and again, and just be a real pain to get rid of. Rare situation, but it can happen. Whereas in the newer Total War games from Empire onwards, it was a case of they suffer one defeat, okay, they suffer the second defeat, wiped out. Even if you barely killed any of them, wiped out. Full stack wipe. So it's just a different system.
Do you think it would be a good idea to try, or would you appreciate to try and have those systems merge?
Both systems have their merits, and I guess you could merge the systems. I do think that an army just shouldn't be able to just keep losing a battle over and over again and just keep retreating on the same turn, which is something that can happen. Another thing that is frustrating, this is across all Total War games, is when a unit retreats, it doesn't consider the terrain at all, and so sometimes you could be on a river and got their back against the wall, but because they check like 2 or 3 spaces backwards, they actually end up going all the way around a mountain just to get to that point, so they end up moving a really long distance. This is prevalent in every single Total War game, so it'd be interesting to see if an army was actually cut off and they just couldn't escape. There are rare instances where the game checks to see that it can't run away, but it's not very well done.
Yeah, I know. If you attack an army that's in forced march stance, that's a very common one in Warhammer 3 right now. Other than that, it's very rare do I see that elsewhere, where they just can't run away. Also, if you ambush them and they just can't run from the ambush too. Those are like the only 2 instances I know of more recent.
Well, in Warhammer 3 specifically, you can always run from an ambush, even if you're in force march, and the AI will routinely just run off the battlefield, even if it means they're complete annihilation. But what ends up happening, how it's detrimental to the player if you just let them do that, is because the amount of experience and loot that you get is determined on how much you kill, and if the enemy army just walks off the battlefield and you don't kill any of them, you don't get any loot or any experience whatsoever. So there's a downside to doing that.
Yeah, I can see that.
Just it's just different ways of, I guess, annihilating completely enemy forces. Warhammer doesn't do it amazingly well. You're oftentimes playing a lot of whack-a-mole.
Yeah, and that's the thing I know for me, at least. I always hate... I don't mind when I'm playing like Scarbrand or Valkia, where I can just keep running you guys down. Like, then I don't mind. But with other factions, especially factions that aren't that quick, it's always a pain in the ass. Like, hey, I tried to attack this one army, ran out of my distance, and I can't hit them the second time. It's like, god damn it.
Yeah,
well,
see, in Rome 1 and Medieval 2, if you attack an army and it withdraws, it can't move the next turn. It's stuck there. So you can end your turn close to it, and it's going to be there the next turn. And while the next turn it'll have an option to run away again, you will catch it eventually. So you need to be damn sure if you're going to hit that withdraw button that you've got backup coming, because otherwise that army is stranded.
Yeah. Is there anything else that we want to talk about, or do you have much more time? Because I know we're going roughly about to 30 minutes.
Yeah,
now.
I got a bit more time. It's all good.
Okay. Let's see. Another system that I think would be a good one to talk about is resources. So kind of comparing just previous Total Wars we had just financials and the more recent stuff that they've been trying with Troy and Pharaoh. How do you feel about the different resource systems that they've been utilizing?
Well, the different resource systems that Troy implemented is actually the shining light of that particular game.
Hmm.
If you've got resources in the game that have like really impactful effects, that is a good thing. Um, just thinking to Europa Universalis 4, for example, where every province has a particular resource, and obtaining a those resources has some noticeable benefit. Also, same thing with like Rome 2. You would acquire a resource and it would potentially give you quite a significant global bonus.
Hmm.
These are all good things. If you look into it, how Total War Warhammer does it, there are resources on the map, but there
Hmm.
are actually very few factions that actually it
Care.
really matters what those resources are. They're starting to get a little bit better with it. Like there's specific global bonuses that apply if you upgrade the resource buildings. But this
Hmm.
is the more you play into this, the better. Previously, it used to just be you build the resource and you sell the resource, and it
Yep.
really didn't matter what that resource was. That's not a great system.
Hmm.
They're getting better with this stuff.
Yeah, because I know Warriors of Chaos, great example as to why it makes matter for them. I know the most recent stuff, Kislev started to actually matter for them a little bit more too. Um, I know for myself, I've always been on the fence a little bit about this stuff with Troy. I do kind of appreciate the different resource systems, but I think with, and this might just be because of the fact that I like to focus on building up my kingdom and focusing really on the development of my kingdom. It's it adds in a complication to the development of your cities that is, it's not necessarily fun to juggle all those different resources, and this just might be for me that like at times it's not a bad thing to have a simplified system, but you do want resources to matter. And I know for me, that's why I kind of, when I think of the ideal system, I like a combination of kind of what Shogun 2 had and like what I'm seeing right now, like with the Warriors of Chaos. Best example for me, like how to make resources matter for a faction, is the Warriors of Chaos in Warhammer 3. And some sort of balance there, I think would work really well, or would be at least enjoyable.
Yeah, for sure. Another thing that could work really well is a supply and demand system. So let's just say that if you've got population in your game,
Hmm.
this is something that Civilization does quite well. So you've got a certain amount of population, and so they want wine as a resource. And if you can supply them 100% of what they need, then you would get a bonus to, let's just say, happiness. If they wanted spices, maybe that would increase income by 10%, who knows? Those sort of things. But you would actually have to supply them, not just acquire one of that resource, which is what happens in Warhammer, but you would, like, the more population you have, the more you would actually need to acquire that particular resource in order to maintain the supplied benefit. You could even argue that that's something that happens in Anno 1800,
Hmm.
but I mean, that game does it to the extreme, and that's
Yeah.
very satisfying, providing the different satisfactions of your population.
I might be misremembering this, but I feel like I remember in Divide Imperia for Rome 2. I think they also actually did a similar system with the resources, I think. It's been a while since I've played
I
that mod.
never played it that much that I can remember it to that extent. It wouldn't surprise me if they did do that. It was a very in-depth mod, but I can't confirm that because I just didn't play it enough.
Yeah, and that's like, I vaguely remember that. I'd have to look into it again, and I know I've been wanting to try and do another campaign in that mod and for a while now. But I could have sworn I remember something like that because I know for myself, I do want to be able to go back to a population system for cities. I do like the idea, and this is where I think I didn't mind the way things were set up in Three Kingdoms as much, because it did kind of bring back population in some regard, not exactly how I wanted it, but the idea of being able to see your kingdom like physically grow, as opposed to, hey, you have more growth, you have more growth, yay, more growth, and it's disconnected from the actual like population of your kingdom. Like I'm the person that's always really loved the stats in Total War, like being able to see the graphs and compare your faction to other factions. I miss that
Yeah,
so much.
I really miss that mechanic. That was a good one.
It was a really fun way to kind of see, especially like if you just recently fought a really big battle, being able to see a drastic decrease in the military of a faction felt really good. it felt so good to see how your actions were actually affecting the enemies that you were fighting. Instead of just, well, I think they're dying. I don't know. I just killed like 4 armies here. Are they just going to spawn 4 more and it's not going to matter? I don't know.
Yeah, that was something that Medieval 2 did really well because I remember one time I just very early on in my gameplay of it, I think I was playing as the Holy Roman Empire and France sent a few armies at me and I obliterated them and then they recruited some armies fairly quickly, but it was just filled with ballista. And the reason they did that is because they had completely drained their manpower of every single other unit. I just murdered them all. And so all that was left was them to spam ballistas because they weren't spamming them beforehand, but that was all that was left. So the army compositions that the enemy would build was largely dependent on what you had already obliterated because they just couldn't spam knights anymore. They were gone.
Yeah. And that very easily leads into one system that I know I definitely want to talk about is, so what do you think is better to have for Total War? A pooled system or just endlessly recruit whatever unit type you want? Because I know in Warhammer we kind of have a little bit of both because of Nurgle. I personally really do kind of miss actually the idea of the pools are somewhat annoying to deal with sometimes if they take forever to replenish.
It's a good question. The Medieval 2 recruitment system is the best recruitment system that we've ever had because it encouraged variety in your armies. It encouraged you to use, like if you wanted to play optimally for Medieval 2, you have to recruit every unit type that's available to you. It's not simply a case of just spam the strongest unit. That's not optimal at all. It was the best system, and they've semi done that with Warhammer 2, Warhammer 3, or both of them really. They've semi done that by making these caps a global effect, but the problem is that you just increase the cap so high that you just spam that one unit into one army, and then when the unit gets obliterated, then they're all still available again because it's a maximum cap. Like what happens with the Beastmen, Tomb Kings, and the Chaos Dwarfs. It's not quite the same. It's definitely better than just being able to spam the strongest unit straight off the bat. But the Medieval 2 system was specifically good because you could recruit a whole army full of knights, for example, send them into battle and get obliterated, and then you just have to wait ages to get them back. You were forced to recruit your lower tier units in those sort of situations. So that was definitely the best system. But also there's the Rome 1 system, which you could possibly do both the Medieval 2 and Rome system combined, where you would recruit a unit and it would actually draw from the population. It doesn't do that in Medieval 2.
Yeah, no. I do know for sure that Divide Imperia for Rome 2, that one did implement that. It draws you from the population, and they actually split up population based on different social classes.
They did. I remember this one specifically, but it's a player-only mechanic because the AI doesn't understand it, so it wasn't quite the same. Whereas in Rome 1 and Medieval 2, when in Rome 1 the AI recruited peasants or whatever from the city, it would actually lower the population. So the AI was playing by the same rules as the player. Now, obviously, it was really good that Divide and Imperia implemented that, but because the AI was hard-coded not to understand that kind of stuff, because it just wasn't part of the base game, it was just a player-only mechanic. And because it was a player-only mechanic, it was detrimental only.
Yeah.
So it was beneficial for the AI they could just recruit unlimited armies. They didn't have to worry about manpower. So that didn't make it as enjoyable to me.
Yeah, and I know that's a thing where this is partially why I actually struggled and kind of was irritated with Attila when I was first playing it, is the cheats for the Attila AI was so bad, and it never felt like it was playing fair. I know recently...
Yeah, that is... Sorry, you go on.
Yeah, I was just going to talking about... the Empire Total War 2 extended mod actually did a very similar system that Divide Imperia did, but the AI also does have to play by that same rule. And... it makes it that, like, I had some of my, like, besides the game hitting some hard limits in that, I had some of my most fun battles with that mod because it made it so that it felt like, okay, there's a lot of armies here, but they're recruiting what they can around here, and it doesn't feel like they're just spawning armies out of nowhere. And it feels like they're playing by the same limited rules I am, and it felt so much more, far more satisfying to defeat those armies. I still remember playing. I was playing as pirates, and I killed an army of 13,000 Apache forces because I had grenades and guns, and like, hey, I was limited troops, but like these are the best troops I had available, and they were throwing the best troops they had of me available.
Yep. So as long as you're having fun, that's what matters. Yeah.
Yeah, and that oh shit, that was I had a thought before I went on that tangent of why I think it's so important to be able to have the AI feel like it's not just cheating against you because
Yeah, yeah. No, I totally understand that. It's okay, I think, for the AI to get bonuses, extra money, cheats, extra recruitment, that kind of stuff. But when they fundamentally play by a different set of rules, that's really annoying. So Total War Attila is one of the mainline games that really does that quite badly on the campaign map because the AI doesn't know how to play the game. There are lots of hurdles that the player can understand and not fall into them. For example, attrition, walking through the snow will basically deplete your manpower, but the AI doesn't suffer from that same penalty, and so their Sassanid forces go frolicking in the snow during the winter, and the winter in the later stage of the game is 3/4 of the damn year. And so you're sitting there, you have no choice but to watch as these armies just frolic out in the snow, while you have to just wait for the snows to recede. It gives the AI a massive advantage just because they don't know how to play the game. And that can feel very frustrating to go up against when it's not that they're getting cheats, they don't know how to play the game, and so they're not playing the same game you're playing.
like I know for me, like I was so happy when they made the change in between Warhammer 2 and Warhammer 3 of the melee buffs. Like I know for myself, it's like, oh, I can actually care about infantry again, kind of, because there's no longer just an inherent bonus to the AI stats in melee attack and defense.
Yes, that was good. It also came in a bit of a drawback for more legendary difficulty players because at the end of the day, if you didn't want the melee to feel unsatisfying, you could have always just played on normal difficulty. Like normal difficulty on Warhammer 2 is the same as normal difficulty on Warhammer 3, but very hard battle difficulty is the same as hard battle difficulty from Warhammer 2. It's just they just halve the AI cheats, and what that means is that people who are looking for a serious challenge aren't really going to get that anymore in Warhammer 3.
Yeah, because I
Yeah,
know for
you could have just
me,
put the setting on whatever you want. That's what it's there for.
yeah, because I know it was Warhammer 2. I tried a legendary Archaon campaign. It was so different to what you'd have nowadays. Every battle
Yeah,
mattered.
it was brutal in Warhammer 2. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Is there anything else that we would want to discuss? I think that's a good amount. Honestly, that's a lot of different systems and ideas. Do you have any other thoughts before I think we would probably maybe just be done for now? Because I think that we covered a lot.
No, I don't have any further thoughts.
Okay.
I'm all good.
Well, I am going to then thank you, Legend, for joining me for this little interview. Hopefully, it was fun to talk about a potential spiritual successor. I'm hoping for myself. It doesn't take me forever to try and develop this. It's fun trying to figure out the map right now in Unreal. That's fun. That's fun. But I'm hoping that this video is going to be a good way to kind of build support and interest in this idea, because I know for myself, I've wanted a Medieval 3 for so long, and I'm hoping that I can try and make a game that everyone will actually want to enjoy, and it will be an immersive experience. And that's my hope. And I think...
Well, I'll definitely be looking forward to seeing whatever you develop.
And I'm glad to hear that. But for now, though, I'm going to thank you for joining me, and I'll thank anybody that watched this video, and I'll then be seeing everybody in the future. So, see you guys next time.